Jasmine Crockett's presence at the Liberty Forum wasn't just unexpected, it was nearly unthinkable. The Forum, a tightly controlled political event, was primarily composed of conservative lawmakers, donors, strategists, and media allies. It was not a space where one would expect to see a Democratic Congresswoman from Texas, especially one as outspoken as Crockett, quietly seated among the audience. And yet, there she was, no fanfare, no entourage, just her. She arrived early, slipping in while the lobby was still bustling with guests checking in. Dressed professionally but understated, she didn't draw attention to herself. People who recognized her did double takes but didn't approach. There was confusion on a few faces, but no one said anything outright. It was the kind of moment where those in attendance weren't sure if they should be surprised or concerned. What stood out most was how intentionally Crockett carried herself. She wasn't there to crash the event in a dramatic fashion. She didn't bring a camera crew, she didn't alert the press. She came alone, sat down, and quietly waited for the program to begin. This wasn't performance, it was purpose. The Liberty Forum itself was being held in a private ballroom at a high-end DC hotel. Security was tight, names were cross-checked against a list. There were metal detectors and multiple credential checks. Getting in wasn't easy, especially for someone whose name wasn't printed on a guest badge, but Crockett made it through legitimately as it turned out. She had been extended a back-channel courtesy pass through a mutual acquaintance, someone who believed there might be value in having different perspectives in the room. Still, no one expected her to use it. When her presence was confirmed, aides behind the scenes began whispering. The event's organizers were caught off guard. Her arrival hadn't been planned, and it disrupted the controlled nature of the guest list. There was a quiet scramble to figure out whether she should be allowed to stay, even though, technically, she hadn't broken any rules. She took a seat in the third row, not in the back, not off to the side, but directly within view of the stage. She didn't pull out a phone, she didn't fidget or whisper to those around her. She just watched, absorbing the speeches, the introductions, and the tone of the event. Her presence alone shifted the mood slightly, even before a single word was exchanged. People noticed her, some with skepticism, others with irritation, but she remained composed. As the headliner of the event walked on stage, applause rang out, and it was then that he saw her. His eyes scanned the crowd, pausing for just a beat when they landed on her. The recognition was instant. He leaned to the side, said something quietly to an aide, and that aide quickly stepped out of view, likely to alert security. There was no shouting, no confrontation, just a subtle shift in energy. But everyone nearby felt it. Security personnel began moving, not hurriedly, but with intention. They were heading toward Crockett's seat. Those sitting near her stole glances, sensing that something was about to happen. The anticipation was almost tangible. But Crockett didn't flinch. She must have seen them coming, but she didn't turn around. Instead, she slowly rose to her feet, not with defiance, but with dignity. She looked directly toward the stage, and spoke before anyone else had the chance to say a word. In that moment, her presence transformed from unexpected to undeniable. What had started as a quiet anomaly in the audience now became the center of attention. The room fell still. The security team froze mid-step, and all eyes turned to her. The truth was, she wasn't supposed to be there, at least, not according to the expectations of the event's organizers or the assumptions of the audience. But her being there, calm, silent, and observant, challenged the very idea of who gets to be in the room and why. And when the moment came, she didn't hesitate. Her unexpected presence was no accident. It was a deliberate choice to show up where voices like hers were rarely welcomed, and to speak, not to protest, but to be heard. When the security team started to move in her direction, most people expected Jasmine Crockett to either resist or retreat. That's usually how these moments go, either a dramatic confrontation or a quiet exit, but Crockett didn't choose either. Instead, she stood with a calm and deliberate posture, as if she had been waiting for this exact moment, not to stir chaos, but to offer clarity. The setting was tense. Everyone could see where this was going. The former president was on stage, speaking to a room filled with allies and supporters. The mood had been charged all day, and now, with a known political adversary seated prominently in the crowd, tensions were threatening to boil. From his position on stage, he paused mid-sentence when he noticed the subtle shift in the room, the movement of the security staff and the attention drawing toward Crockett. She didn't wait to be asked to leave. She didn't challenge anyone. Instead, she raised her hand slightly, not to object, but simply to signal that she wanted to speak. And then she did. Without a microphone, without permission, but with a voice that carried clear, steady, and composed. I know I'm not on the list, she began, her tone respectful yet unwavering. But I came here today not to argue, not to protest, but to listen. And if I'm allowed just a moment, I'd like to say something before I'm asked to leave. That single moment altered the mood of the entire room. The security team, who had been just a few steps from her, hesitated. She wasn't shouting. She wasn't being disruptive. She was making a polite but firm request to be heard, briefly, before being removed on stage. He didn't interrupt her, he simply watched, arms folded, eyebrows raised. Perhaps he was curious, perhaps he was caught off guard. Either way, he didn't stop her, and that restraint gave her just enough space to continue. Crockett kept her tone even. No sarcasm. Grandstanding. We don't often get a chance to be in the same room, she said, addressing him directly but respectfully. And while I don't expect we'll agree on much, I believe that leaders regardless of party should be able to share the same space without fear or hostility. That line struck a chord, even with those who disagreed with her politics. There was an undeniable sincerity in her voice. She wasn't performing for cameras or trying to score points. She was simply taking an opportunity to show that not every political divide had to turn into a shouting match. He tilted his head slightly, almost amused but not dismissive. You could see he was evaluating the moment, weighing his next move. The audience, meanwhile, remained quiet. Phones were out, people were recording, but no one interrupted. I respect that this is your event, she continued, glancing briefly toward the security staff. And if you still want me to leave, I will. But before I go, I want to remind everyone in this room that disagreement doesn't have to mean disrespect. It was such a simple message, and yet, it landed with surprising weight. Maybe it was because she didn't come in with anger. Maybe it was because, in a room where everyone expected confrontation, she brought restraint. Or maybe it was the contrast between the expectation of chaos and the reality of her poise. He held up a hand toward the security team, an unmistakable signal to stand down. He didn't say much, just nodded slightly in her direction and said, "You've got 2 minutes." It wasn't warm, but it wasn't hostile either. It was a rare moment of agreement. She'd earned the right to be heard, even if briefly. And that's exactly what she did. She didn't launch into a speech. She didn't attack anyone. She simply spoke from a place of civility. Her words weren't designed to provoke, they were designed to remind everyone in the room, including him, that strength isn't always loud, and leadership doesn't always come with applause. In those 2 minutes, Crockett showed a kind of composure that's rare in political theater. She stood her ground without raising her voice, and perhaps most notably, she changed the temperature of the room not by matching the heat, but by lowering it. The room had settled into an uneasy silence after Jasmine Crockett rose to speak. The tension wasn't just about protocol or security, it was about the message people expected her to deliver. Many thought she would lash out, issue accusations, or challenge the speaker head-on, but the tone she chose was not combative. It was something else entirely measured, sincere, and, most of all, focused on unity. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. She had been given just 2 minutes by him, who now stood behind the podium, arms crossed, waiting. It wasn't a warm welcome, but it was a chance, a narrow opening, and Crockett used it wisely. "I'm not here to rewrite anyone's beliefs," she said, her voice steady, "and I'm certainly not here to interrupt your message. But there's something I think we're losing in all of this, something more important than party or platform." There was no applause, no reaction, just a collective stillness. She wasn't trying to rile the crowd. She wasn't even trying to win them over. She was holding up a mirror. He continued, watching her, not saying a word. But his expression had shifted from suspicion to something else, perhaps curiosity or even mild interest. This wasn't what he had expected. "I walked into this room knowing full well I'd be seen as an outsider," she said, "but I came because I believe there has to be a space, however small, where people like you and I can hear each other without tearing each other down." It was an unexpected thing to say, especially in a space where division had often been rewarded with applause, but her tone made it difficult to dismiss her. She wasn't there to convert anyone. She was there to remind him that the distance between opposing sides didn't always have to be hostility. "I listened to your speeches," she continued, now looking directly toward him. "I hear how you talk about strength, about loyalty, about putting America first. I don't agree with your approach, but I understand where your supporters are coming from. They want to feel heard. They want to feel like someone's fighting for them." He raised an eyebrow slightly at that, maybe surprised to hear acknowledgement rather than critique. The crowd was still quiet, unsure of whether to accept her words or reject them outright, but she kept going. "I represent people, too," she said. "People who are struggling, people who feel ignored. And what I've learned is that anger doesn't just live on one side. It's everywhere. It's in rural towns, in urban neighborhoods, on both coasts, and in the middle of the country." She paused for a breath. "And maybe if we spent less time calling each other enemies and more time asking why we're all so angry, we'd find out we've got more in common than we think." It wasn't a soundbite. It wasn't a zinger. It was a quiet plea for empathy, delivered in a room not known for it. He didn't interrupt her. In fact, for the first time since she started speaking, he shifted his stance ever so slightly, as if easing back, not in agreement, but perhaps in acknowledgement that this moment was different from the usual political back and forth. Crockett glanced around the room. We are never going to agree on everything, and frankly, we shouldn't have to. But disagreement doesn't have to mean division. And division doesn't have to mean destruction. Asterisk there, it was the line that changed everything. Simple, direct, and entirely disarming. Asterisk, some people in the crowd blinked in disbelief. Not because they agreed with her, but because she wasn't giving them the fight they'd prepared for. She came into the room carrying no weapons, only words, and those words were not aimed like bullets. They were laid down like a bridge. Asterisk, she looked back at him one last time. I came here to remind us that we don't have to be this far apart. Even when we sit on opposite sides of the aisle, we're still supposed to be in the same room for the same country. Asterisk, he didn't respond right away, but the room stayed silent long after she finished, as if trying to process the shift. Slogans, no jabs, just a rare moment of political restraint and a message that even he couldn't easily dismiss. Asterisk, after Jasmine Crockett spoke, the room didn't return to business as usual. Something had shifted. The air, once thick with tension and assumptions, now felt uncertain, almost reflective. It wasn't what anyone expected, not from her, not at this kind of event, and certainly not in the presence of someone like him, who was known for commanding every room he entered. Asterisk, he returned to the podium after her brief remarks, and for a moment he didn't speak. That silence was notable. Normally he was quick to reassert control, to reframe the moment and return the spotlight to his own narrative, but not this time. He glanced down at his notes, then looked back up toward the crowd. His posture was still firm, but his expression had softened, if only slightly. Asterisk, there was no attempt to mock her or dismiss what she had said. Instead, he acknowledged her in his own way, not by agreeing but by choosing not to fight her presence or her words. That, in itself, was rare. Asterisk, the audience, too, seemed unsure of what to do next. For a crowd often accustomed to political red meat and applause lines, this quiet pause was unfamiliar territory. Crockett's message had cut through the norm, because it was aggressive, but because it wasn't. She hadn't tried to win anyone over. She had simply refused to play the expected role of antagonist. Asterisk, people who had come to the forum ready to cheer predictable talking points now found themselves rethinking what they'd just witnessed. Some of the attendees, staffers, journalists, even donors were quietly texting, likely trying to capture the unusual tone of the event. It wasn't something that fit easily into a headline. Asterisk, Crockett had left shortly after speaking, escorted out not by force but with a kind of mutual respect. No one heckled her, no one jeered. It was as if everyone understood that something unique had just occurred, and her absence only made her words linger longer in the room. Asterisk, as the rest of the event continued, speakers who followed subtly shifted their tone. While no one referenced her directly, it was clear they were speaking into the silence she had created. There was less posturing, fewer sweeping generalizations. People chose their words more carefully. Asterisk, he resumed his speech eventually, but not with his usual fire. He mentioned national unity, briefly. He spoke of the need to protect American values. But the mood had changed, and so had the audience's reception. Some still cheered, but others listened more quietly, more thoughtfully. Asterisk, what Crockett had done, whether intentionally or instinctively, was introduce an unexpected level of introspection. And it wasn't just about her message. It was about how she delivered it, without shouting, without blame, without expecting applause. Asterisk, even those who had entered the forum skeptical of her presence, now found themselves revisiting her words. Some whispered to one another afterward that it was bold of her to speak. Others admitted it had made them think more deeply than any previous segment of the event. Asterisk, in political circles, moments like this are rare. Most speeches are rehearsed. Most interactions follow a script, but this was different. This was unscripted, civil, and disarming. Asterisk, he too seemed to understand that. While he never directly praised her, he didn't ridicule her either. And for a man known for his sharp responses and quick put-downs, that silence said more than words. Asterisk, behind the scenes, aides on both sides were already discussing what had just happened. Some worried that allowing her to speak made the event look weak. Others believed it was a sign of unexpected maturity. But one thing was certain, her words had shifted the atmosphere. Asterisk, by the time the summit concluded, the hallway conversations weren't just about strategy or policy. They were about the moment when a political opponent walked into an unfriendly room, asked to speak, and against every expectation left without a single voice raised in anger. Asterisk, sometimes all it takes to change the tone of a room is for the person to show up differently. Jasmine Crockett had done just that, and even he who rarely let go of the narrative had allowed it to happen. The forum went on, but not untouched. Her presence left a mark that couldn't be ignored. Asterisk. As the final moments of the event unfolded, there was a noticeable shift in the rooms, energy less rigid, less rehearsed, more aware. Jasmine Crockett's presence had been brief, her words carefully chosen, and her tone respectful, but the impact far-reaching. She hadn't come to score political points or stage a protest. Instead, she had offered something surprisingly rare in today's climate: grace under pressure, and a call for basic human respect. Asterisk, for many in attendance, It was a jarring contrast to what they expected. They anticipated conflict. They anticipated a scene. What they got instead was a reflection, a moment that forced everyone, including the former president himself, to reckon with the reality that political discourse doesn't always have to descend into chaos. Crockett didn't win anyone over with theatrics or outrage. She left an impression by doing exactly the opposite. He, a figure not easily moved and rarely caught off guard, had allowed her to speak. That, in itself, sent a message, whether intentional or not. For someone who has built his legacy on control and commanding the narrative, choosing not to shut her down said more than 100 speeches could have. It showed that even the most powerful rooms can pause for something real. In the days that followed, the moment continued to ripple. Clips of Crockett's brief speech circulated online, not because they were explosive, but because they were genuine. Commentators from both sides took notice. Some praised her composure. Others criticized the event for allowing her on the stage at all. But everyone agreed on one thing. She didn't come to tear anyone down. She came to show that civility is still possible, even when the room is divided. What makes moments like these powerful isn't their noise, but their quiet strength. It's easy to shout over others. It's harder to speak plainly and let the words do the work. Jasmine Crockett's approach reminded people that leadership isn't always about dominance. Sometimes it's about listening even in places where you're not expected to be heard. And for him, the decision to let her speak of and briefly marked a rare moment of restraint. No outbursts, no rebuttal, just a nod, a gesture, a silent acknowledgement that sometimes even a political opponent can deserve the floor, if only for 2 minutes. In an era of division and performative outrage, what happened that day was subtle but profound. It wasn't a debate, it wasn't a out, it was something more meaningful, a shared moment of stillness in a room where noise usually reigns. And from that stillness, a message emerged that neither side could easily ignore. Sometimes, the most shocking thing you can do is to speak with quiet